Want to welcome you to another edition of Curiosity, Not Judgment. Welcome in. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
So we had a couple of topics kind of in the vault, so to speak, in the notes section of my phone, and went back and revisited some of those. And one we began talking about just a few moments ago and thought, this is the one for today. So talking about roles and how we really live in different capacities between work and family life and faith life and volunteerism and all of the things. We have different roles in all these different spheres. And how do we navigate through life wearing all these different hats?
And why or do we act differently in each one of those roles? And the curious question is, why would we act differently in different roles?
I would think, the first thing that comes to my mind about that answer of why would we act differently is because we've maybe built a persona based on a time of life when we've entered into a particular arena. Maybe you started in a company when you were this young, fresh, single, fired up individual, and you kind of had this bravado about you, and you kind of keep up that act. But maybe now it's 10 or 15 years later, and now you're married with young kids, and really at home you're a very different person. I could imagine just time of entry into whatever sphere might change your tone a little bit.
I think that's a really good one. I think also, you say persona that we're trying to present, and I immediately went to mask, and it's a bad thing, but it could be a good thing too, especially if you're trying to, based on your life experiences and where you are in your journey, evolve into somebody that does act differently and do things differently. Then that might be also because a season of where you are in life when you start that role. That's fascinating. I hadn't even thought of that. I was thinking more along the lines of the old, at one point in our lives, I was thinking about, what is our legacy? What am I trying to become? Who am I trying to be? And one of the interesting questions or strategies, whatever you call it, work things to go through is to say, okay, fast forward to my funeral in 20, 50 years and say, what would I want my spouse to have said? What do I want my kids to have said? What do I want my employer to have said? And how those things are different. And that's why you go through each one. So there's a positive and a negative to anything. And so the question of why do I act differently in each of those roles is our perceived the things we're trying to accomplish in each one of those roles. A parent is different than a child. As a child, we are trying to learn, and as an adult, we're trying to teach, for instance, and that's different. But on the other hand, given similar situations in each of those roles, you would think that you would act, if we have integrity, fairly the same, right? And so that was what was going through my head at the time.
Well, I don't know if this is on the integrity meter. I don't think it is, but I will say even for my professional role, so I serve as a community outreach coordinator. I am with people all the time, and I am talking a lot and giving a lot of information and giving presentations, and I have to be up and I have to be cheery and I have to be positive. And that is not really my default personality. My default is a little bit more pessimistic. I skew a little bit more negative, and I definitely skew introverted. And so by the time I leave work, I am done peopling.
Yes.
And so I don't think it's an integrity issue, but there is a certain thing that you have to bring forward to perform in a job.
Get to bring forward,
thank you. And then there is the opportunity to then kind of relax into your natural state at home.
Interesting.
And so I would say I probably look different in a work setting versus a home setting.
Yeah, and one could argue also that that should be different in the fact that at home you're totally concerned with, hopefully, relationship with spouse, children, adults in your home, etc. And at work, maybe you're more concentrated on things and accomplishing things with machines and computers and getting a certain quote work done versus at home. Maybe it's less of an agenda, less about the work, more about effectiveness versus efficiency, and being and concentrating on relationships. That's interesting, and within work, your different roles, right?
Sure.
Boss, employee, colleague, et cetera, and how do those all affect those roles, right? And so, what are some behaviors that you notice that are different between, let's just use work and home?
So, as I said, I feel like I skew more pessimistic and I skew more introverted, and I am a deep critical thinker. I'm a long processor. I am somebody who will stew on something probably too long, but that is where my kind of core being, my core essence really is in the natural state. At work, I have to be quicker to make decisions. I have to be engaged without processing fully. And I will argue, so I work in an anti-human trafficking organization. If I allowed myself to fully process on that subject matter, I think I would be ruined. And I say that not as dismissive of the information that I need to know, but if I really went through that kind of core normal state for myself and really processed human trafficking, I think I would be so undone I couldn't function. And so there is a slice off the top, I guess, of where I normally am at work so that I can do it quicker, I can do it more effective, and I can do it in a more positive frame of mind.
Yeah, a protective layer, so to speak, where you could stay kind of surface and make decisions without going too deep, because it's a tough subject.
Yeah.
But I would submit you probably do that at home too on different subjects.
On occasion, yeah.
And it probably is more about where you need to put protective layers on tough stuff that just happens to be more at work than at home. It might be the other way around for some people.
Sure.
Right? Some people may have more tough stuff happening at home than at work.
I can easily imagine that.
And so maybe that's what it is. And as you were talking about how you're a deep critical thinker and you like to make decisions over a long period of time, there's nobody in your house that wants you to make a decision?
Yes, but I think I have kind of become the house manager, and so by default, I think I do make a lot of the decisions, and so I seldom am hurried along in the process at home.
I guess I would submit that you probably have a hierarchy of decision making where you understand that certain decisions, you only have to go so deep and you can make them quickly, and you probably make just as many or more decisions at home than you do at work at that surface level. It's just a matter of what your work is.
Right.
And so that's interesting. So I would claim, and I would think that our roles are subsets of our lives where we have different inputs within the same framework. But then when I say that, I realize that I act differently around different people and different groups of people also. Sometimes I think I act like, oh my goodness, these people are going to be critical of everything I do and I can't be as relaxed, and I make decisions differently around this group that I feel very comfortable around. I know they trust me, I trust them, and so I have a different decision-making process around them. I'm more open, I'm more vulnerable, I'm more willing to admit that, flaws, mistakes, things like that, than I would be over here.
Yeah.
Right? And I think I have that at home and at work.
That is interesting. I'm thinking back over a couple of key moments in my life where, family and career has definitely intersected. And I've had a massive pivot. So I think I've shared this before, I was in radio for 10 years, and then I had this moment that I pivoted into nonprofit. And I was paralyzed in being able to make a decision at that point because of, my natural inclination and who I am and how I process. And I finally just said to my husband, I was like, you make the decision on behalf of our family. I cannot do it. And, that really set the tone for a big shift in our life. But yes, even though, sometimes our roles dictate that we do serve in a particular capacity, there's going to be seasons when we can't. We're incapacitated for some reason or another, whether it be health issues, mental health issues, all kinds of things can prohibit you from carrying out your natural role. And you need somebody else to step in and do it for you.
Well, and that gets a little bit into natural versus learned also, right? And how much do we take that into each of our roles, and how important that is, because sometimes we may think that, okay, let's just talk about being a new parent for a minute. Last time I checked, there still isn't a manual that comes with a baby that says do this, don't do that.
Well, there's a few books that attempt to do that,
There
but
are
yes,
many.
there's no across the
Naturally,
board
there's
manual.
no,
Yeah.
and so we generally have taken what we've learned in our lives and what we've done with respect to our parents and how they parented us, other observations we've made in life, depending on how old we are when we have our first kid, and then we try to apply that. I would say that there's a lot more pressure, though, on that role than there is in the role of being a kid
Oh, yes.
yourself. And so
Yes.
you may put onto that role certain obligations, perceptions, and things that you wouldn't normally put into, say, the role of being a sister or a child.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so so how much we pressure ourselves and how we handle the pressure of what we think is in that role might have a lot to do with how we act in that role.
Yeah. Well, and I even think to the age-old gag about parents versus grandparents.
Yes.
And I can't speak to this. I'm not a grandparent yet, but you certainly have done both roles, and you thrive in the grandpa role.
Yes, yes. And not that I didn't thrive in the parent role, but this is a lot more fun. I mean, because you don't have to look for those teachable moments. You don't have to you're not trying to scurry this person from place to place to place and trying to get them places on time and interacting with the daily stuff. I mean, when you're a grandparent, it's just kind of like, what are we going to do now? And living in the moment and in the present. And it's a total different experience and a total different role. And I have often said to my kids, my dad you don't know the same person that raised me,
Yes,
right?
precisely.
This is not the same person that
Yes.
raised me, because he's in the role of a grandparent and now a great grandparent, as opposed to the role of a father, right?
All right, so let me ask you in that case, has the role of your father changed in the interaction between the two of you as he added the role of grandfather?
Totally. Absolutely. Now, how much of that is just, getting older and wiser? How much of that is retiring from the military? How much of that is changes that have occurred in his life? And how much of that is actually going from the role from parent to grandparent?
Yeah.
But absolutely, as he's gone in the season of, or in the arc of his life, I'll go this way for the camera, he has absolutely changed from when he was a parent and at that age to now. So is that due to other circumstances? Is that due to, other things? And I don't know that he's ever analyzed, how do I act differently now than when I did then?
Yeah.
I'll ask him to do that, because we have fun with that kind of stuff now. But the other part of that is, here's a good, curious question. How much of the role that I'm about to take on or that I find myself in is intimidating to me, or do I feel I might not be good enough in, that causes me to act in this way or that way?
Whether that be stepping into a relationship, starting a new job,
Becoming
becoming
a
a parent.
parent.
Yeah.
Yes?
I think that's the key one of us not
Well,
feeling
I mean,
like we know what
that's
we're
the
doing.
one that everybody kind of goes
Yeah.
through, or most people do, and that can be the most intimidating. I mean, it's legendary when you finally look at this being in your hands and go, this is great. Now what? And I think we all have gone through that, and looking back on it, it was an exciting, amazing time. But you're in this role and you don't know what to do, and there's everything from sleep deprivation to all kinds of stuff going on at the same time, total changes in your life, total changes in focus. And it's good to be curious. But a good curious question is, how did I handle that? What did I do there? Because that might be instructful for things that you're facing now.
Oh yeah. We over this Easter last weekend. Let me try that again in English. This past weekend was Easter weekend, and at our church service, we had an opportunity that several people got up and shared some things, and I was sharing a little bit of my story. And when I was a new mom, I had 2 kids in pretty quick succession. I had my daughters about 18 months apart, so it was a lot of new and it was a lot of chaos. And I think I really had some undiagnosed postpartum depression. I was so in over my head, and I was not experiencing the joy that I thought everyone was supposed to be experiencing. And because the typical role of a mom is promoted out there and through whatever channel, it's like, oh, you're just instantly in love with this little baby, and it's so joyful. And yes, maybe someone mentions sleep deprivation now and again, but by and large, the experience is the most joyous thing you'll ever do. And I was struggling so badly in my role as a mom. It was just compounded by the fact that I thought that I wasn't meeting the requirements of the role of being full of joy and exuberance and, all of the things that I was either expecting myself to do or I felt like the world was expecting me to do. And so it is a tough thing when you step into a role that you feel like you're not equipped to do.
You said something key there, and I think it's another good, curious question. Do I feel I'm meeting the expectations of this role? Because expectations has a lot to do with it.
Yes.
And you just said it twice there. Am I living up to the expectations of a mom? You could replace mom with any of your roles and
Yes.
say, do I feel like I'm living up to those expectations? Why or why not? And are those expectations real? Are those expectations imposed by others or imposed by me? Are those expectations realistic? And I think with a new mom, you can almost always say, no, they're not realistic. And yes, they're put on by other people. Because of all of the all the perceptions and the life experiences that we've had as to what that's supposed to be. Of course, being a mother changes you. And of course, we can look at the Hallmark films and the ways of how motherhood has changed people 20 years hence. But in the moment, I think most people would tell you that it's very hard.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult. And you say undiagnosed. I think we're just discovering, and not only discovering, but admitting to or acknowledging that is part of the experience.
Yeah.
There's many disease processes that have I don't want to say a depression, a downer portion to them that come with the disease and with the process. And giving birth is one of those.
Yeah.
And while you're going through life-changing experience, you also have a lot of questions. Am I good enough? Am I capable enough? Am I going to do a good job of this?
Yeah. So I know that we have talked so much in the past about comparison, what the quick access to the internet does positively and negatively, but I can't help but bring up those two attributes in this conversation because I think, again, it is so key in us feeling fulfilled or worthy of a particular role is, are we comparing ourselves to others? And are we using the internet in a way that we are setting ourselves up for failure in the sense of, I remember very well my daughter's first birthday, and there was several of us that had all had kids around the same time. And several of the moms had these elaborate first birthday parties, and there was themes and decorations, and I was doing good if I could get a shower. And but it was the comparison that killed me, right? And it was the access to the comparison by way of the internet, right? And you've got Pinterest was new on the scene at the time, and all the Pinterest boards about baby's first birthday, and oh my goodness, did I feel like a failure in every possible way.
Poor thing. I feel so bad for you. And
Where were you, Gary?
Well,
Where were you?
Thank God there was no Pinterest. There's still not Pinterest in my life, but there was no Pinterest and there was none of that comparisons at the time at that level.
Yeah.
But of course we're always comparing ourselves to others in that way, and it's a bummer. And then we've talked about this before, and everybody knows this at some level. But social media doesn't show the disaster first birthdays, parties, right?
Yeah.
And the ones where none of the kids show up or none of the parents show up or something happens on the day, which obviously does happen.
Yeah.
You only see the tip of the iceberg of the good stuff. That's what you would post anyway. You don't post the bad stuff. And so, of course but yeah, nothing good ever comes from comparisons. You either think that, oh, woe is me, I'm not good enough, or you think, oh, aren't I better than everyone else? That's not good either. So comparisons in general are bad, and we have talked about that many times, but especially when it comes to something that you're questioning about whether you're good enough and whether you're meeting the standard in a given role. The purpose of saying, do I believe that I'm meeting the expectations in a role, is not to create guilt or shame or depression or bad feelings about it. The purpose of that is to evaluate the expectations and to evaluate any perceived gap between what you feel and perceive your performance is with respect to those expectations, and then decide, do I need to reevaluate the expectations? Probably the answer is yes. And have I done a good job of thinking about the gap in between my perceived performance and expectations? And is my perceived performance real, or is that my own perception? And finally, do I want to do anything about closing that gap? Because there are many things in my life where I realize that there's a gap between what my perceived performance and my perceived expectations are, but it doesn't rise to my top 10 to do anything about. And those things I have to say, be gone.
Yeah.
Because there's only so many things I can work on and do in my life.
Yeah. But assuming the gap is substantial enough and it bothers you enough that you want to work on it, I think then the next wave of curious questions really comes in, right? What are the resources that you approach in order to meet the needs of that gap?
How can I ask for help?
Yes.
What are the other resources available to me to do this? And so it's back to the whole, am I motivated to do something about it? And then how much, what do I think the odds are that I can do it? And then, okay, if I decide to do something about it, what can I do? How can I ask for help? What resources do I have to address the problem? And at what pace do I want to address the problem? I think that's the other thing too, especially for me. I feel like sometimes if I want to address something, then I want to fix it right now.
Right. Has to be
And I
solved
want
in
it to be
24
fixed
hours.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right? And that's just not reality in most cases. It's usually step changes, and sometimes imperceptibly slow step changes.
Yeah. Let me circle back around to where we started as we kind of conclude our time today, and about if we find ourselves really operating differently in the different roles in our lives. Is that a concern? Is it to be expected? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think to the point where we're not disingenuous, and we are not trying to do things outside of our own roles. It's always good to stretch ourselves, but we should not be taking on roles that are so totally against what we who we are, that it's not a stretching exercise, it's a design for failure, right? So I think each of those roles should be evaluated. We shouldn't jump into different roles where the only expectation can be failure. I mean, that's a bit masochistic and dysfunctional, right? So we would want to engage in roles that are going to be a continuous path for growth in our lives and a journey, and has some excitement. We certainly don't want to do roles that require no growth and nothing new. But there's a balance in that. And then it is, okay, let's recognize that I am different and I have different expectations in each of these roles. And what you're seeing in that is not a different person. It's not Birga in this role is a total different person than Birga in this role. It's an adaptation of the same Birga in each of those roles. How are those roles different? And am I meeting those expectations in those roles to my best belief and perception?
Yeah, and I would imagine you can draw on strengths that you have in one role that you have a deficit in another, and because it is the fullness of you, maybe just coming out in different elements or in different ways in these different positions.
And you're going to have different people involved in each one of those, some of which are more or less capable in the same things you are.
Yeah.
And so the ideal one is where you're collaborating with a person to do some goal, whether it's raise a child or get something accomplished at work. And that you have complementary skills. And there's some overlap, just so you can see eye to eye on a few things, but there's a lot of collaboration that occurs because you have different skills and bring different things to the party. And your roles then with respect to that, even that relationship, are different.
Well, good things to think about, and I will put on my hat to go to my next appointment, and we'll see, see how I transition to the next role. Thank you. Always good conversation. So we love your feedback at curiositynotjudgment.com, and we'll catch up again with you next week.
Take care.